I'm Andrew Klavan, and this is my new story, Another Kingdom, performed by Michael Knowles. In the last episode, traveling to the Getty Museum, Austin found a painting that he thought might be a clue to the whereabouts of the mysterious book Another Kingdom. But as he tried to leave the building, he was cut off by the kitten-faced killer Sarah on one side and the police looking for a suspect in the murder of Sean Gunther on the other. Rushing through a door, he was flung back into a sword fight in Galiana, where he received what would have been a deadly wound if he hadn't fallen back into LA, where modern medical care saved his life. There, he questioned his family about their connections to the sinister billionaire Serge Orozco and began to suspect his kooky sister Riley had the answers, but Riley was nowhere to be found. And now, Another Kingdom, Episode 11.
The next day, some of the gang from Hitchcock's dropped by. Skyler and Chad Valentine and Ren Yen. Wexler didn't come because, said Skyler, it would have harmed his burgeoning reputation as a Hollywood dickhead. But Skyler knew that wasn't why I looked disappointed when they came in. Why I stole a glance around her massive presence to see if anyone else was coming through the door behind her.
She had to go to New Zealand,
she told me gruffly.
It was all of a sudden. Alexis is meeting a director there, or David is. I can't remember. You know what they're like.
I nodded. I pretended it didn't matter, that it was fine.
She said to say hello, Skyler added grudgingly. She says she'll try to call. She says she's afraid of disturbing your rest with the time difference and everything.
I nodded again. Then she confessed the whole truth.
She says to send her love.
Later, when it was time for them to leave, Skyler let Chad and Ren go out before her. Then she leaned in very close to me. Her cherubic and furious face was terrifying at that distance.
What the fuck is going on with you?
She said in a hissing whisper.
First your head is practically caved in, then it's suddenly fine. Then you're wanted for murder.
I wasn't wanted for...
Then you get stabbed,
she said.
Stabbed? At the Getty? No one gets stabbed at the Getty, Austin. It's a fucking museum.
I started back against the headboard as she lifted one hand to me, claw-like, as if she was going to rip my face off. I really think she would have done it, too, if I hadn't looked so weak and pitiful. But her hand sunk down then, though her eyes went on burning with rage.
She's been crying, she whispered. You understand me? She thinks I don't hear her, but she's crying because she's so worried about you. And if you feel good about that, so help me God, I will kill you right here and now.
Well, I did feel good about it a little, but I felt bad about it, too. I didn't want to make Jane cry. I just wanted to possess her body and soul and fill her womb with a new generation. Even just to see her and chat would have been nice.
Asshole,
said Skyler, and she turned her elephantine bulk away and thundered to the door. Tell her I'm fine, Skyler.
Fuck you,
she said, giving me the finger as she stormed out of the room. When she was gone, I called Riley. There was no answer. I called Rich. I got his voicemail. I left a message. Get the hell over here, I said. But Rich didn't get the hell over, even though I called him several times again. Another day went by and then another. There was no sign of him. I was starting to feel better now, starting to get stronger. The stitching on my ribs was still ugly, the shaved spot white and pale, like my flesh was rotten. But the wound no longer gave me that bizarre feeling it had given me at first, as if I were empty in there, as if my innards were rattling around in a space too large for them. Skyler went to my apartment for me and brought me some clothes to wear. Track pants, sweatshirts. I started taking twice daily exercise walks along the hallways. I was even off the intravenous antibiotics, so I could walk without carting my IV pole around. The cop who was guarding me, whichever uniformed patrolman happened to be on duty that particular day, would walk along behind me. Whenever I glanced back, he'd be there, following me, his eyes scanning the nurses and doctors and patients and visitors who passed along the halls. Who are we looking for? I asked him. Stone-faced, he shook his head, said nothing. That's how I knew they hadn't found Sarah yet, that Sarah was still out there somewhere, still after me. Soon I was cantering up and down the stairs in the stairwell. The cop still followed me. I could hear him panting above me on my way down, below me on my way back up. I would do the routine once in the morning and once in the evening. My wound burned a little as I worked up speed, but the painful throbbing was gone. On my 10th day, my last day at the hospital, when I returned from my evening jaunt, I stepped into my room and found Rich there waiting for me. He was standing at the window across the room, his back to the door, his hands in the pocket of his sky blue slacks. His bearded face was reflected on the pane where night had fallen. He must have seen me reflected there too. He turned around before I even spoke. His suit was impeccably pressed. His golden tie seemed to flow naturally from his golden beard. Only his eyes betrayed anxiety, laced with red, ringed with gray. We looked at one another silently for a moment. Then I went into the bathroom to get a towel. I wiped the sweat off my face as I stepped back out into the room. I noticed I didn't hesitate anymore when I went over a threshold. I wasn't afraid of being whisked back to Galiana, or at least I wasn't thinking about it. After 10 days here in the hospital, the whole Galianan experience seemed completely unreal to me. I had even begun to wonder if maybe the lie I'd told the police was true. Maybe it was Sarah who stabbed me. Maybe that first thought I'd had on waking here in the hospital, that Galiana had been some sort of coma dream, maybe that was true as well. I lowered the towel. I looked at Rich. "Where is she?" I said. He pretended not to understand me, and I said, "Come on, man. Riley, where is she?" He averted his eyes. He shrugged. "I don't know. Is she all right?" "I don't know." "Well, is she alive, damn it?"
Damn it, I don't know.
He turned his back on me again, looking out the window. I moved over to the bed. I threw my towel down on it angrily. Rich muttered,
"What did you expect, Austin?"
"I didn't expect anything," I said, because until now, I didn't realize my parents and my brother were agents of an international conspiracy.
Keep your voice down.
Well, what? To do what? Install space aliens in government? Are the aliens real? I meant this as a bitter joke. At least I thought I did. At this point, I wasn't entirely sure. I found myself waiting tensely for his answer. After a moment or two, he snorted.
"Thank God for the aliens," he said. "It's the aliens that saved her."
I let out a sigh of relief. No aliens, then. Well, that was something anyway. My sister's videos were such a crazy version of Orozco's crazy plans that even Orozco wasn't crazy enough to take them seriously. That's how Rich had managed to keep her alive. Until now, at least. My brother still didn't turn around. He kept on staring out the window through his own reflection at the night beyond.
"He wasn't always like this,"
he said, after another little pause. Our eyes met on the pane.
"Serge, it's only recently he's gotten like this. You know, with old age coming on. The prospect of the end."
"Don't kid yourself," I told him. "He didn't create Sarah overnight. That took time. God alone knows what he did to that child." He didn't answer right away. I took that for an admission.
"Even great men have flaws," he said finally.
I laughed, mirthlessly. Jesus Christ, Rich. He swung around to face me. His voice was firm and angry, but his eyes, I could see all his doubt and decency in his eyes. Whatever Orozco had drawn Rich into, Rich knew he was into it too deep.
"Is it so wrong to believe that things can be better than they are?"
he asked me.
"A world without war, where no one's bigger or better than anyone else?"
I didn't know what to say. He was my successful, brilliant big brother. The guy wrote books, for crying out loud. He was interviewed on TV. He gave speeches about his big ideas on how to change the world. People paid to hear him. Me. I was a Hollywood nothing. I hardly even followed the news day to day. How could I tell him about what I'd seen on the streets of Eastrom? The heretics and traitors in their cages. The guards torturing them to death while the degenerate, bloodthirsty crowds cheered them on. Iron seduced them into rebellion with promises of a perfect country, where each is equal in all things to another, Turritanio had told me. They tried to kill the wisest queen in all the world in the name of that illusion, Magdala had said. But what did it all mean here, in Los Angeles, in real life? I didn't know. Still, Rich reacted as if I'd spoken out loud, as if I'd accused him of something.
"Well, what do you do for anybody?" he said irritably. "Huh, Mr. Showbiz? I mean, you think what I believe is so terrible. What do you believe?"
The question drew my gaze to him. I was still thinking about Shadow Wood and the forest king and queen. I remembered how they said to me that Queen Elinda had sent me to them because they needed fighting men of brave heart and right belief. Me. Austin Lively, a fighting man of brave heart and right belief. So, what did I believe? It was a good question. I met my brother's eyes and he met mine. "What's in the book, Rich?" I asked him. "Another kingdom. Why does he want it so badly?" He made a little noise of frustration, shaking his head.
"He's obsessed with it. I don't know, it's like he thinks it has some sort of power or something."
"Power? What sort of?"
I don't know. He's old, Austin. He's old and he's afraid of death."
"Oh, he's afraid of more than that, brother. I mean, has he told you his whole story about the all-night conversation in the dacha with the cowl guy?" I couldn't interpret the gesture he made in response. It either meant he'd never heard the story or he'd heard so many stories he couldn't recall one over another. I'm not sure. "Do you know where it is?" he asked me. "The book. Do you know where the book is?" The image of Riley flashed in my mind again. Riley lying on the bed, Marco sitting beside her, gesturing toward the bookshelf. Had I really seen the red volume there? Well, if I had, I wasn't going to tell Rich, that was for sure. Whatever else happened, whatever happened to me, I had to find my kid sister before Orozco's people did. Any of Orozco's people, including my mother and father and Rich himself. I had to get to her first to make sure she was safe. I made a helpless gesture, shook my head. "Are you sure?" Rich said. "I mean, don't fuck around about this, Austin. Serge can be a good friend, but..." I sneered. "But what? But cross him and he kills you? Don't do what he says and he kills you? I thought you'd convinced him to spare me and throw Sarah under the bus." He started to answer, but thought better of it. He turned away again, back to the window, back to the night. "It's a big bus," he said quietly. "If Sarah should happen to turn up and murder you, and then..." His voice trailed off. "And then if Sarah gets arrested or killed by the police," I finished the thought when his voice trailed off. "It takes care of a lot of problems. Is that why you came here tonight? Is that what you came to tell me?" Rich didn't answer. He just stood looking out at the darkness. I gave another derisive laugh. "The Orozco age," I said. That was my last night in the hospital. The doctors had wanted to keep me another day, but I had to go. I couldn't reach Riley on the phone or by email, and I couldn't just sit there and wait for her to turn up dead. I was still a bit weak, but I felt strong enough to do what I had to do. I talked the docs into springing me. I fell asleep that night around 10 o'clock. I had a dream, a terrible dream. I dreamt I was in the hallway of a Gothic mansion. I dreamt I was in a sword fight, like in some old Knights in Armor movie on TV. I dreamt I killed a man, ran him through with my sword, and watched at close quarters as the life and the hope of life drained from his face. But then, dreamlike, the next moment, the dying man was me. It was me with the blade buried deep in my body. It was me feeling all the soul light flickering into blackness. I knew the last thing I would ever see was the triumphant face of the man who'd killed me, filling my vision. The last thing I would ever hear was his roaring, victorious laughter. I woke up with my heart hammering, my pillow soaked with sweat. I lay staring up at the ceiling. The lights in the room were off, but the light from the hall came in through the open door and everything was visible in the gray shadows. My dream came back to me. In fragments, but vivid enough that I could piece them together. Was that what had really happened to me? A sword fight in a Gothic manse? Or was it an assassin outside the museum? Either scenario was too crazy to be real. And yet, if either scenario was unreal, then what did that mean about me? About my brain, about my sanity? My eyes filled in the semi-darkness. I wasn't sure of anything, not anything. What the hell was happening to me? What the hell was happening to my life? Miserable, I rolled my head on the pillow so I could look out the door at the lighted hallway. I saw right away that something was wrong, but it took me a moment to figure out what it was. It was the chair. The chair out in the hall by the door. It was empty. The cop was gone. I swung out of bed, my gut aching. I pulled my track pants off the chair and put them on. I stepped through the room's shadows out into the hall. The whole hall was empty. The entire hospital hall from one end to the other, empty. The questions went through my mind again. How powerful was Orozco? How far did his influence reach? Could he have me killed right here, right now, with no one around to stop him? Somewhere, out of sight around the corner to my right, I heard a swinging door pushed open. I heard it swing shut. I heard footsteps coming my way. I stood there, indecisive, helpless, almost surrendered to my fate, as the footsteps came closer and closer. Then a nurse came around the corner, reading charts on her tablet. She glanced up and smiled at me briefly as she went past. The hallway was empty again, quiet. I went back into my room. In the morning, an aide came to fetch me with a wheelchair. It was hospital policy, he said. I wasn't allowed to walk to the front door on my own. I sat in the chair with an overnight bag in my lap. As the aide pushed me along, I watched the faces rolling past, and the faces watched me, or at least I thought they were watching. I thought there was more than one nurse and doctor and aide and security guard who followed my passing with expressions that blended fear and guilt and pity. It could have been my imagination. It must have been. We rounded the semicircular reception desk and reached the big glass doors of the hospital exit. The aide brought the chair to a stop. I stood up. I said goodbye to him. He was a young, cheerful, caramel-colored guy, 6 feet tall and broad-shouldered. He gave me a grave nod of farewell. "Be careful out there, my man," he said. Then he winked and turned around and wheeled the chair around the reception desk and out of sight. Be careful. I wondered why he had said that. But really, anyone could have said it, just to be nice. I turned back toward the exit. I approached the doors. I put my hand on the metal bar that opened them. I hesitated and looked through the glass, surveying the scene. The hospital was part of a medical complex, a small maze of streets and structures set apart from the traffic-packed boulevards and leafy residential lanes of Beverly Hills. It was like a small town set in the midst of a big city. Beyond the doors, across the street, medicos in scrubs and patients in day clothes walked on the sidewalk, passing by the open maw of a blocky parking structure set between a tower of glass and a tower of white stone. There were cars parked by the curb and cars and delivery trucks cruising along the street. Everything looked normal out there, even serene. I pushed outside. It was a fine autumn day, warm and mellow, bright and clear. My plan was to get some air and exercise after my long confinement by strolling out to the main road and then summoning a car on my phone. But before I took a single step, there was a piercing tone, a series of piercing tones. I jumped and stiffened, but it was only the warning signal from a van that was backing up from my left, edging slowly toward me. Smiling ruefully at my own nerves, I stood and watched as the van drew up in front of me. It was a white van with pictures on the side of loaves of bread. I guessed it was delivering fresh-baked goods to the hospital cafes. Still emitting those sharp, high tones, the van backed slowly past me until its large windshield came into view. The windshield was dark and reflected the street in front of it. I saw Sarah's image on the glass. The assassin was standing on the corner to my left, standing at the corner of the white building there watching me. I held my breath. I spun to face him. I caught one glimpse of the feline face beneath the boy short blonde hair. One glimpse of the girl's slender legs in hug-tight jeans and the man torso in a leather jacket with a red t-shirt underneath. He was smiling a louche, sensuous smile. I knew he was there to kill me. One glimpse, 1 second, then he was gone, slipping behind the building and out of sight. Had I really seen him? Or was I worked up to such a state of suspense my mind had conjured him out of nothing? I wasn't sure. For the last few days, I'd thought I was being transported back and forth between L.A. and a land of nymphs and ogres. How the hell could I be sure of anything? My heart was hammering just as rapidly as it had hammered after my nightmare last night. Maybe this was a nightmare too. I swallowed hard. I turned away from the spot where Sarah had been standing. I started walking quickly in the opposite direction, toward the boulevard. I tried to be cool about it, but I was not cool. I kept looking back over my shoulder to make sure the kitten-faced killer wasn't following me, or hadn't snuck up right behind me. There was no sign of him. I kept walking. Then I reached the corner and saw him again. He must have moved quick as thought. Somehow he had circled the block and come out from behind a medical building across the next street. I was sure I saw him this time. He was standing by the point of a wall, grinning at me. At this distance, I could even see the threat of death in his lunatic eyes. A truck rumbled between us, and, like in a conjuring trick, Sarah vanished once again. The truck went past and he was gone, just like that. I cursed. Enough. This was no dream. I shifted my overnight bag to my left hand, took my phone out of my pants pocket with my right. Slipping the bag handle over my wrist, I clumsily worked the business card the detectives had given me out of my shirt pocket. I tapped in the number. "Detective Lord?" came the big woman's matter-of-fact voice. "This is Austin Lively," I said. I could almost feel the detective sit up and take notice. I could hear the sudden focus in her tone. "Yes?" "He's here. The man who stabbed me. The man who killed Gunther. He's following me." There was a long pause. It was unnerving. What the hell was there to pause about? This was an emergency, wasn't it? Shouldn't she be sending help? "Where are you?" asked Detective Lord carefully. I heard my own voice spiral higher with growing panic. "I'm just outside the hospital, just at the corner of San Vicente." I looked longingly across the boulevard. I wanted to keep moving, to get out of there, but the traffic light was red. There was nowhere to go. "Do you see him now?" Detective Lord asked me. "Not right now, but he was there just a second ago. Twice. I think he's toying with me. He shows himself, then disappears. You said to call." Again, that pause. It made my stomach drop. What the hell was going on with her? Even in the fine, clear weather, I felt a clammy sweat break out on the back of my neck. "Hello?" I said. "So you don't see him right now," said Detective Lord. She was still speaking very carefully, very slowly. "Not this minute, but..." There was a beat of silence. Then Detective Lord said, "Uh-huh." The light changed. I started moving across the wide avenue. Somehow I already knew what Lord was going to say next. All the same, when she actually said it, I felt my whole body fill with a bleak gray atmosphere that I recognized as despair. "Well," she began, and now she put on a bland, official, mock businesslike tone. "We can't really do anything if you don't see him at the moment. What I would suggest, why don't you give me a call if you see him again and we'll try to check it out." An answer started to rise up into my throat, but it stuck there like a solid thing, like plastic letters all jammed up and jumbled together in my gullet. I wanted to cry out to her, "If I see him again, he's a murderer. If I see him again, I'll be dead." But I didn't say that. I didn't say anything. I knew there was no point. Detective Lord had her instructions from on high. I hadn't found another kingdom. To Serge Orozco, I was now just a loose end, another witness who could link him to Sean Gunther's murder, a stumbling block on the way to Utopia. In other words, a dead man. I cut the connection. To hell with her. To hell with the cops. I pocketed the phone. I upped my walking speed. Up ahead of me, there was a construction site. A massive indoor shopping mall, either undergoing renovations or being torn down. I wasn't sure which. One half of it was a sleek white stone and glass commercial palace, several stories high. The other half was a skeletal ruin of dirt, girders, cement, and rebar, rising above wooden street-level fencing. Here and there in the fence there were open corridors and dark doors, mysterious entrances and exits in and out of nowhere. It was an immense, haunting monument to failure or promise, one or the other. I eyed it as I approached, wondering if I might duck into the mess of it and make my escape. I reached the curb. There was a trash can there on the corner. I dumped in my overnight bag. I glanced back over my shoulder and took a long scan of the landscape behind me. The traffic rushing along the big avenue, the medical complex across the way. No Sarah. The assassin was gone. I faced forward, and there he was. How the hell did he keep doing that? Suddenly, he was right in front of me, sashaying along the length of the mall fencing in that aggressively feminine way of his. The motion made his short blonde hair bounce gaily around his feline features. He smiled at me, sweetly, his bright eyes mad. There was no one else on the sidewalk. This was L.A. No one walked here. People were in their cars, grinding, honking, rushing past. Here, it was just him and me converging quickly. He slipped his right hand into his jacket pocket. The pocket bulged and stiffened, protruding in my direction. Was it my imagination? Or could I see the outline of a gun muzzle shaping the fabric? I did not think it was my imagination. I figured I only had a single second before he pulled the trigger. No one would hear the muffled shot with all this traffic roaring past. I would simply wilt to the sidewalk like a dying flower. Who knew how long it would be before someone even noticed I was dead? Instinctively, I turned to avoid the shot, a useless gesture. But in turning, I saw an entryway, a sign, escalators to shops. Without breaking stride, I ducked in. I was in a high stairwell of metal and cement. Zigzagging flight after flight of escalators rolled up alongside the green walls. There were people standing on each slanting length of moving stairs, riding up from the parking structure beneath the mall or descending back down into it. I got on the first escalator up and started climbing the metal steps, weaving between the shoppers who were standing still. I glanced back behind me as I rose, and yes, there was Sarah, standing below at the street-level doorway, watching me ascend. His smile was gone. His pouting lips were taut. His cat's eyes were flashing. I knew from the look of him that he had, in fact, been about to kill me on the street. He was frustrated that I'd managed to dodge him. He wouldn't kill me here with all these witnesses. Or would he? Would anything stop him now? How crazy was he anyway? I wasn't sure. I climbed the moving stairs, up to the top of the first escalator, then whipping around onto the second, then climbing to the top of that to the third, pushing past the customers the whole way. I nearly tripped and fell as the next escalator ended. I stumbled off and saw an open doorway. I dashed through it. I emerged from the darkness of the well into bright daylight, a scene both dazzling and bizarre. The mall seemed to have been cut in half. To my right was a vast expanse of bright white floors and storefront windows. Above me were rings of gallery walks under cascading skylight panels that were full of the bright blue sky. To my left, through a towering wall of protective glass, an open construction site was on display. Pit of dirt littered with abandoned bulldozers, a half-completed structure of iron girders and wooden planks, empty platforms on dangling pulleys, between unidentifiable structures of cement. Either they were tearing this place down while shoppers rushed to consume the last of the merchandise, or building the place up while shoppers scrambled hungrily over what was already there. The mall half was crowded with people, women mostly, walking purposefully past sleekly dressed mannequins, past window displays of glittering purses and jewels, past spanking new sports equipment and workout machines and electronics and toys and a featureless cafe of tall, bland chairs and squat, bland tables. Tinkling pop music filled the high spaces like a colorless, mesmeric gas and settled on the shoppers like a pall. I tried to vanish. I wove myself into the fabric of the crowd and threaded my way through it, trying to hide among the moving bodies and confound the searching gaze of my pursuer. I looked around for him as I went. I couldn't see him anywhere. Maybe it was he who was confounding me. I pushed on along the glassed-in edge of the open pit, hoping to find an exit, hoping to duck out of there before he caught me. But the place was built like a trap. They do that with malls. They make sure you have to walk the length of them before you can exit. The idea is, once you start shopping, you have to shop everywhere. Shop the merchandise to its dregs before you can reach the open air again. I kept pushing through the crowd, but my wounds had weakened me. I was already out of breath and losing energy quickly. I wasn't sure how long I could keep up my pace. I almost made it all the way. I made it to where the shops curled around to meet the glassed-in construction site. There was a last string of well-stocked storefronts on one side, the wilderness of the open pit on the other, and between them a narrow hallway, a way out, maybe 20 yards ahead. I pulled to a stop. I had to. I had to rest. I stood amidst the swiftly passing clots of people, my chest heaving as I gulped in air. Austin. Oh, Austin. He sang my name like plainsong, low and rhythmic, at such a key it was somehow audible above the footsteps and the voices and the pall of tuneless music. The sound sent a jagged bolt of terror through me. I raised my head. He was right in front of me, coming out of the exit hall. How had he done it? How had he gotten around me so fast? Never mind, there he was, strutting toward me like a model on a catwalk, completely unimpeded by the wave of shoppers washing over him. They jostled each other, but not him, never him. He just passed right through them like a shark, like the ghost of a shark, coming at me. He was seconds away, moving fast, drawing his hand out of his pocket so that already I could see the black grip of the gun between his fingers. I looked for a way out. To my left was the window on the pit. To my right, a shop. A storefront window. 24 TV screens within. Moving scenes of rushing silver rivers, waving meadows of yellow-green grass and purple alpine mountains covered in white snow, shelves and shelves of incomprehensible gewgaws and flashing gizmos, glittering contraptions and devices, and their multicolored cases and accessories, a confusion of electronic riches. No clue, in my panic, what any of it was. Who cared? I just wanted to live. I charged toward it. I reached the store in 2 steps, heard a woman scream, thought she must have spotted the gun. I heaved the glass door open, expecting the blast any second, the searing jolt of the bullet, the long plummet into black and bloody death. But I made it. I was through the door, running. In my mind, I kept on running, but no, I was getting nowhere. The world spun wildly. Disoriented, I thought the shop had tipped over and spilled me onto the floor. I was on the floor anyway, on my back, in a pool of blood, so much blood. Sarah must have shot me. No one could lose so much blood and live. I heard another scream, a high scream ragged with anguish. Then Lady Betharay flung herself down on top of me, her tear-stained face smeared with gore. "No, you've killed him!" I was back in Galliana, back in Netherdale, in the bedroom, on the floor where I had fallen after Sir Erebus kicked me off the length of his sword. Hearing Lady Betharay scream, seeing the anguish on her face, I almost sat up, almost embraced her. I would have done it on instinct, if I hadn't been so disoriented and confused by the sudden change. But as I lay there dazed, as I only slowly began to realize what had happened to me, I caught myself. I kept still. I went on lying there, because I should have been dead, right? I would have been dead if I hadn't just received 10 days of 21st century healthcare, complete with expert surgery and enough antibiotics to kill every infection within a mile of me. Here in Galliana, though, Sir Erebus must think he'd killed me. Of course he did. I let my eyes slip nearly closed. I stopped breathing. For another second, only a second, Lady Betharay bent over me, sobbing. Then Sir Erebus loomed above us both. His eyes were hot. His cheeks were scarlet. He grabbed her arm. She cried out as he hauled her brutally away from me. I turned my head just enough so I could watch it all through half-parted eyelids. Sir Erebus was dragging her across the floor toward the four-poster bed. She struggled in his grip. "Let go of me, you animal!" But she was helpless. He was just too much stronger. He yanked her up and tossed her onto the four-poster as if she were a rag doll. She came up immediately into a sitting position. "How dare you? You—" "Shut up!" He slapped her. The shock of the blow made her go still, wide-eyed. "That's it. Not so fine a lady now, are you?" he growled. "My husband," she whispered fiercely. Then she gasped as he grabbed a handful of her raven hair and pulled her toward him. "Don't you get it? Your husband's done with you, bitch," he said. "He gave you to me to do what I like with, to throw you out like the trash you are. But first," he pulled her face to his and mashed his lips against her. She tried to turn away, but he wouldn't let her, and the kiss hit her mouth like a blow. She tried to claw at his face. He pulled back and slapped her again, twice, a backhand, then a forehand, harder. He leaned down over her, close. "But first," he said again, very softly this time, "first I'm going to pay you for every superior sneer you ever gave me. I'm going to pull you down off your high horse and show you what my low-born body can do to the likes of you." With that, he hurled her back onto the mattress. She cried out pitiably and tried to roll away from him. He climbed on top of her and pinned her on her back. Then he seized the front of her gown and violently tore it open while she cried out again. He forced himself down on top of her as she struggled. Holding her by the hair, he buried his face against her breast. She let out a ragged and awful cry. "God help me!" By now I had my sword. I had groped around and found it on the floor right by my hand. My hand, my arm, my body were all still clothed in the magic mercurial armor Queen Elinda had left for me in the Shadow Wood Oak. It flowed with my body as I moved slowly so as not to draw attention to myself. My fingers closed around the sword's hilt. I began to climb to my feet, still slowly. If Sir Erebus saw me, if he had time to turn, time to draw his own weapon, he would drive his blade into me just as surely as he had the first time. But he didn't see me. He didn't turn. He reared up above Lady Betharay and tore her dress again and then again until it was in rags around her. She let out a sob of anguish and despair. "No, don't." The sound of her misery went through me like a kind of fire. I rose off the floor like a flame. I stood, sword in hand. I started moving toward them where they struggled on the bed. Sir Erebus looked down at Betharay's nakedness. He laughed. "You're no fine lady now, are you? This is the truth of you. This is how the world's supposed to be." It was just then I reached him. I stretched out my hand. My fingers closed around his collar. The captain of the guard let out a broken little noise of surprise and perplexity. "What?" Before he could resist, I hauled him off the woman and off the bed and spun him toward me. His face went gray as the statue on the lid of a crypt. His eyes went wide and white as supper plates. "But how?" he said. I drove my blade straight through the center of him. "The miracle of modern medicine," I said. "Now die, you piece of shit." Skewered, Sir Erebus hung gaping on my blade. He tried to speak, but only his eyes could tell his horror. He'd been struck clean through by the risen specter of a dead man. His last sight on earth must have seemed to him like the very proof of hell and justice. For another second, our faces were inches apart, his agony and terror that close to me, and my hatred just as close to him. Then he was gone wherever dead men go. The dangling weight of his corpse drew my blade point toward the ground, and when the sword was slanted down like that, the body slid off it and fell to the floor with a liquid thud. I stood over him, looked at him. I remembered in a flash the shock I had felt the first time I killed a man, moments ago in Galliana time, but a week and a half since to me. I remembered the moral immensity of it, the cosmic immensity of snuffing out a life, of ending a consciousness. That was gone now. I was a different man. Maybe crueler, maybe just harder in this harder world, I couldn't say. All I knew is Erebus had struck Lady Betharay. He had tried to rape Lady Betharay, and I did not give a damn about him, or his cosmic being, or his consciousness, or anything. He had earned this, and if I was the one to pay him off, then good for me. Let God forgive him. I didn't. I turned to Betharay. Still lying on the bed, she was staring at me, as shocked to see me standing there as Erebus had been, so shocked she did not move to cover her nakedness. Oh, it was beautiful, her nakedness. milky and rose and shapely as distant hills, decked only with the golden chain and locket at her ivory throat. And I was full and flush with bloodlust and revenge, and the sight of her filled me and aroused me and made me breathless. I averted my eyes from her and sheathed my sword. As I did, the blade seemed to melt into the armor, and the armor seemed to melt into me, and it was suddenly gone. I was dressed in my strange Galliana clothes again, only there was a ragged gash at the center of my vest now, the place where Erebust's sword had gone in. I stared into the candle-lit shadows for a long moment until I had control of myself. "Come on," I said then, my voice hoarse. "Dress yourself. Let's get out of here." We left Sir Erebus dead in the room. We went down the hall past the other two corpses. Lady Betharay wore a belted robe now. She held a candelabra in her hand to light the way. I followed her to a sweeping, majestic staircase, and down we went by flickering candlelight. At the bottom we traveled along another night-dark hall, went into another room finally, another bedroom, larger than the last, the master bedroom, I thought. It was vast, with large windows on the moonlit sky, and cushions on the window seats, and chairs and sofas against the walls, and a canopied four-poster bed even bigger than the one upstairs. Betharay set the candelabra on a table and turned to face me, and I faced her. We stood like that a long time, silent, gaze on gaze. Her face was bruised from the blows that Erebus had given her. Her cheeks were still streaked with the tears she'd cried. But she was calm. I would have thought she'd be, I don't know, hysterical, sobbing, trembling, in shock. But she wasn't. She was calm and steady and regal and very fine. "Are you?" she said after a while. Her voice was calm too, and I said, "What? Am I what?" "Are you a phantom? Are you real? Are you alive?" "I'm real. I'm alive," I said. "Look at me." "But he killed you. I saw him kill you, Austin." "No." I glanced down at the gash in my clothing. I gave a little laugh. "Well, almost, I guess." "The blood, though. There was so much blood." I searched the air above me for an answer. I hadn't really thought about what to say. "My armor," I told her. "The king of the forest gave it to me. It has some magic in it. It healed me." It was the only thing I could think of on short notice. It seemed to satisfy her, though. She nodded. "Yes, Turritanio has always been a friend of the Queen and freedom. He's with us." I smiled. I nodded back. It was kind of crazy when you thought about it. Magic and the Forest King, that made sense to her. But if I'd told her about the hospital and antibiotics, she wouldn't have understood what I was talking about. She went on standing there, studying me, thoughtful, silent. Then she closed the gap between us with a gliding step. She lifted her hand to my cheek, her cool hand. I leaned against it, comforted and stirred. "He was going to kill me," she said. "Aravist. He was going to use me and then kill me." She was still calm, still regal. I nodded. Yes, he was. "Winton, Lord Iron, my husband, gave me to him, said he could do it." "I know. I'm sorry, Beth." We stood another long time, her hand on my cheek, my eyes on her eyes, and me breathing, trying not to pull her to me, thinking it would be wrong so soon after her trauma. "But you," she said, "you have never been anything but my hero." And then, as if it were an official decree, she proclaimed, "I am free of my vows." And she came to me and kissed me. There was no resisting this, not for me. I pulled her into my arms. Now we were together with my hands inside her open robe, and the feel of her flesh radiating through my fingers into my core. Kissing her, I backed her to the bed and she folded down on it, and I folded down on top of her. My fingers twined with her raven hair, and my lips were at her breast so that it occurred to me I was in the same position as Sir Erebus had been a few minutes ago. The only differences were my affection and the free consent of her willing spirit.
This has been Another Kingdom by Andrew Klavan, performed by Michael Knowles.